A mysterious girl shouted to a billionaire widower, "Your wife is not dead. I know where she is." Shocking secrets came to light, and his life changed forever. A story of mystery and hope that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The autumn sun filtered through the century-old cypress trees of Central Park Cemetery, casting dancing shadows over the marble tombstones. Edward Smith adjusted his black tie as he walked down the main path, his Italian shoes echoing in the respectful silence of that sacred place. At 45, the billionaire businessman bore the weight of a hotel empire that spanned all of New York, but none of that mattered at that moment. It was Monday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, exactly 2 years since Mary had disappeared in the turbulent waters off the coast of New York. His wife's grave was a work of art in white Carrara marble, with hand-carved cherubs that seemed to watch over her soul eternally. Edward knelt before the tombstone, feeling the cold marble against his knees. "I'm sorry, my love," he murmured, his voice breaking in the silence. "I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me the most." The tears he had learned to hide from employees, investors, and the media 2 years ago finally flowed freely down his suffering-marked face. The scent of jasmine, the same one Mary used to wear, began to linger in the air, bringing vivid memories of lazy mornings in their penthouse on the Upper East Side. Edward closed his eyes, allowing himself for a moment to believe she was there, that it was all just a prolonged nightmare from which he would finally awaken. The gentle breeze swayed the flowers he had brought, white roses, her favorites, and for a moment he almost smiled, remembering how she used to pluck the petals, saying she didn't need flowers, just his presence. "I should have cancelled that meeting in London," he whispered to the cold stone. "I should have gone with you on that boat trip. You begged me to come, said we needed to talk about something important, but I was so obsessed with expanding the business to the southeast that I couldn't see what really mattered." It was then that he heard small footsteps approaching on the still dewy grass. Edward looked up and saw a girl of about 12 walking toward him. She wore a simple floral dress with a yellow daisy pattern and scuffed patent leather shoes. Her light brown hair was tied in 2 braids, and her eyes, extraordinarily piercing for a child, fixed on him with a disturbing intensity. "Excuse me, sir," the girl said, her clear voice cutting through the cemetery's silence like a sharp blade. "Are you Edward Smith, owner of Smith Hotels?" Edward slowly rose, wiping his face with the back of his hand. No one knew about his weekly visits to the cemetery. He had taken every precaution to keep this routine away from the eyes of the press and the curious. "Yes, that's me. But how do you—" "I know who you are," the girl interrupted, her voice gaining urgency. "And I also know who is buried here." She pointed to Mary's grave with a familiarity that sent a chill down Edward's spine. "But I need to talk to you about something very important, something that will change everything." Edward looked around, searching for any responsible adult for the child. The cemetery was practically empty, with only a few distant visitors, tending to other graves. "Where are your parents, young lady? You shouldn't be here alone." "My mother." Her voice trembled for a moment, revealing the vulnerable child behind the determination. "My mother disappeared around the same time as your wife. That's why I'm here." She opened a small fabric bag and pulled out a yellowed envelope, clearly old, with edges worn by time. "This envelope was hidden in her room. It has your name and the address of this cemetery." Edward reached out with a trembling hand to take the envelope, but the girl pulled it back, clutching it to her chest. "Before I give this to you, you need to promise me one thing. You need to promise that you'll help me find my mother, because what's written here—" She paused, nervously biting her lower lip. "What's written here will mess with your head. It will make you want to search for your wife too. "What are you talking about?" Edward asked, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "My wife died 2 years ago. I saw the wreckage of the boat. I participated in the searches for weeks." The girl shook her head vigorously, her braids flying back and forth. "No, sir, your wife is not dead. I know where she is." The words burst from her like an explosion, and Edward felt the world spin around him. "That's impossible," he whispered, his breath becoming irregular. "You're just a child. You don't know what you're talking about." "My mother worked in your house for 5 years, the girl continued, ignoring his disbelief. "She was the housekeeper, Rose Johnson. Do you remember her? Black hair, always wore a blue apron, made those muffins that Mrs. Mary loved." Edward felt his legs go weak. Rose Johnson. Of course, he remembered her. A discreet, efficient woman who knew every corner of the mansion in Alphaville better than he did. Mary had grown very fond of her, always saying that Rose was more than an employee, she was a confidant. "Rose disappeared a few months before Mary. We never knew what happened." "She didn't disappear," the girl said, her eyes filling with tears. "She ran away and took Mrs. Mary with her." The envelope slipped from Edward's trembling hands and fell onto the tombstone. With mechanical movements he picked it up and he opened it with fingers that seemed not to obey the commands of his brain. Inside was a handwritten letter with the unmistakable handwriting of Mary. Delicate, slanted to the left, with the dots over the eyes always in the shape of hearts, a silly habit she had since her teenage years. "Edward, my love," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means that Rose kept her promise to deliver this letter only if something happened to me, or if I couldn't muster the courage to tell you in person what I discovered." Edward lifted his eyes from the letter, his vision blurred by tears. "When did your mother give you this?" "She didn't give it to me," the girl replied, her voice now a whisper. "I found it after she disappeared, along with other letters, photos, and a notebook where she wrote down everything she saw and heard at your place. My mother was scared of something, very scared. On the day she left, she was crying and repeating that she had to protect Mrs. Mary, that something terrible was going to happen." "Protect from whom?" Edward asked, but his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. The girl looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to be listening. "From your partner, from Dr. Richard Johnson." The name hit Edward like a punch to the stomach. Richard, his best friend since college at NYU, his best man, majority partner in the company. The man who had been by his side throughout the search for Mary, who had organized the rescue teams, who had cried with him when they officially declared her dead. "This is madness," Edward murmured. But even as he spoke the words, small memories began to fit together in his mind, like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Richard always knew when Mary was home alone. He always showed up with work excuses when Edward was traveling, the glances they exchanged that he had interpreted as friendship at the time. The girl leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Mr. Edward, your wife discovered something about Dr. Richard, something that could destroy him. That's why she had to pretend she died. That's why my mother had to help her escape. And that's why I need to find my mother so much, because she is the only one who knows where Mrs. Mary is." Edward carefully folded the letter and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. 2 hours ago, he was a man shattered by grief, visiting the grave of his deceased wife. Now, looking at that brave child who had risked everything to bring him the truth, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years. Hope. "What is your name?" he asked, extending his hand to her. "Sophia," she replied, gripping his hand with surprising firmness for a child. "Sophia Johnson. And I will help you find your wife if you help me find my mother." Edward nodded, sealing the pact that would forever change their lives. The following week passed in a blur for Edward. He had arranged a meeting with Sophia at the Mall of America, away from the curious eyes that always followed him in business environments. Sitting in the food court, amid the chatter of families shopping and teenagers skipping school, they looked like just a father and daughter sharing a snack. Edward had ordered a double espresso, his third dose of caffeine for the day, while Sophia enjoyed a strawberry milkshake, her legs swinging nervously under the table. Mrs. Mary was always very kind to me, Sophia began, stirring the straw of her milkshake without taking her eyes off Edward. When my mother took me to work during school holidays, she insisted that I have lunch in the dining room, not in the kitchen with the other staff. She said every child deserved to feel special. Edward felt a tightness in his chest. This was exactly the Mary he knew, the woman who stopped her car to help abandoned dogs, who personally distributed food baskets in the neighborhoods of Southside, who remembered every employee's birthday. Did your mother mention anything about Mary's behavior in the months leading up to her disappearance? Sophia nodded, her expression growing more serious. My mother said Mrs. Mary had changed a lot, that she would spend hours locked in her office, working on the computer, printing documents, and hiding everything in a folder she kept in the bedroom safe, and that she cried a lot, especially when she was on the phone. Phone with whom? I don't know. My mother could never hear the whole conversations, but once she heard Mrs. Mary yelling at someone, saying that she wouldn't stay silent forever, and that she had proof of everything. Sophia paused, biting her lip. It was 2 days after that phone argument that my mother found Mrs. Mary crying in the library, with a bunch of papers scattered on the table. Edward mentally flipped through his memories. In the months leading up to the accident, he had been completely absorbed in negotiations to open a new hotel chain in Miami and Orlando. He worked late hours, traveled constantly, and when he was home, he was still mentally at the office. How many times had Mary tried to talk to him, and he had brushed her off with a "we'll talk. Later, love, I'm busy now." Sophia, you said your mother wrote down everything she saw. Do you still have that notebook? Sophia's eyes lit up. I do. It's hidden in my room. My mother wrote everything down. What time each person arrived and left home, what kind of conversations she heard, even what kind of mood each one was in. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Mr. Edward, Dr. Richard visited your house 17 times in the month before Mrs. Mary disappeared. Always when you weren't there. Edward's coffee cooled in his hands. 17 times. And he completely oblivious too. Everything, blindly trusting the man he considered a brother. I need to see this notebook, Sophia. I need you to tell me everything your mother saw in those last days. Sophia hesitated, nervously fiddling with the straw. There's one thing my mother saw that might upset you a lot. I can't be more upset than I already am, Edward replied, trying to keep his voice calm despite the storm brewing in his chest. The day before Mary left for the beach, my mother saw her handing an envelope to the doorman of Dr. Richard's building. She waited on the corner for over an hour until he got home. When he opened the envelope right there at the front desk, my mother said his face turned as white as paper. Edward involuntarily clenched his fists. And then? Then he called his house. My mother answered because Mary was in the shower. He asked if she was home and if you were there too. When my mother said you were traveling, he hung up quickly. Sophia paused to breathe. Mary came down for dinner an hour later, but barely touched her food. She just kept fiddling with her phone and looking out the window as if she was waiting for someone to arrive. Edward's mind was racing. Mary had discovered something about Richard, something serious enough for her to risk delivering evidence in person. And the next day, she had left alone for that fateful boat trip, insisting she needed time to think and that she would return with important news to share. Sophia, I need to ask you a difficult question, Edward said, leaning over the table. Do you think your mother and Mary planned the disappearance together? Sophia's eyes filled with tears. I think my mother tried to save Mary from something very bad. The day she disappeared, she left a letter on my bed saying she had to go away for a while, but that she would come back when it was safe, that I should stay with my aunt until she returned. A tear rolled down her face. That was 1.5 years ago, Mr. Edward. My aunt is running out of money to support me. Edward felt a wave of paternal protection that he hadn't experienced since his nephews were little. This brave girl had risked everything to bring him the truth, and she was paying a high price for it. Sophia, you won't need to worry about money. I will take care of you while we search for your mother and Mary. But I need you to trust me completely. We will be dealing with dangerous people. I trust you, Sophia said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Mary always said you were the most honest man she knew, that your problem wasn't being dishonest. It was working too much and not paying attention to the people you loved. Mary's words, coming through a child, struck Edward like a well-aimed arrow. How many nights had he come home to find Mary already asleep? How many weekends had he cancelled to resolve emergencies at work that could have waited until Monday? I need to see that notebook today, Edward said, getting up from the table. And I need you to take me to your aunt. I'm going to talk to her about you staying in a safer place while we investigate this. As they walked through the parking lot, Sophia suddenly stopped. Mr. Edward, there's one more thing. Something I didn't tell you because it's very strange. Edward turned to her, his heart racing. What is it? 2 weeks ago, a man in a suit showed up at my aunt's house asking for me. He said he was a lawyer and that he had a proposal to help me with my studies, but he needed to talk to me in person. Sophia swallowed hard. My aunt got suspicious and said I wasn't home. But from the window, I saw he stood in front of the house for almost an hour, just watching. Edward felt a chill run down his spine. Did you get a good look at his face? Not really, but he drove a big black car with tinted windows, and he had a leather briefcase in his hand, just like the one Dr. Richard always carried when he visited your house. At that moment, Edward understood that they were not just looking for 2 missing women. They were stepping into a web of secrets and lies that someone was willing to do anything to keep hidden. And Sophia, a 12-year-old girl, had become a target. Sophia, he said, placing his hands on her shoulders, from now on, you're not going anywhere alone, and if that man shows up again, you call me immediately. He handed her a card with his personal number, no matter the time, no matter where I am. As they drove toward Aunt Carol's house, Edward couldn't stop thinking about one thing. If Richard was indeed involved in Mary's disappearance, it meant that Edward had spent 2 years mourning his wife's death while receiving comfort from the very man who had made her vanish. And worse, it meant that Mary was alive somewhere, waiting for someone to find her, while he visited an empty grave every week like a fool. No more. Aunt Carol's house was in Maplewood, in a modest neighborhood surrounded by low walls and green-painted iron gates. Edward parked his luxury car in front of number 47, feeling the curious stares of neighbors leaning out their windows to observe the luxury car standing out completely from the simple landscape of the neighborhood. Aunt Carol, a woman in her 50s, with graying hair tied in a tight bun and a floral apron stained with flour, greeted them at the door with a mixed expression of distrust and relief. Sophia told me who you are, said Carol, drying her hands on the apron, but I need to be honest. I'm scared. Since that man in a suit showed up here asking for the girl, I can't sleep properly. She looked at Edward with tired eyes. I'm just a seamstress, Mr. Edward. I work from home making clothes for the shops in the garment district. I can't protect Sophia if someone wants to harm her. Edward entered the small but impeccably clean room, furnished with well-maintained antique furniture and the comforting smell of cornbread wafting from the kitchen. "Carol, I understand your concern. That's why I came to propose that you temporarily move to a safer place. I have an available apartment in the Upper East Side, with 24-hour concierge service and security." Carol sat heavily in the brown velvet armchair, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Edward, I've raised Sophia as if she were my own daughter since Rose disappeared. But I'm not foolish. I know powerful people are involved in this. If Rose went missing a year and a half ago, and now a strange man is looking for the girl—" "Aunt Carol," Sophia interrupted, taking the woman's hand, "Mr. Edward is going to help us find my mom, and he will protect us. In the meantime," she looked at Edward with absolute confidence. "He promised." Edward nodded gravely. "It's a promise I intend to keep, but for that, I need to see everything Rose left behind, every note, every document." Sophia ran to the room she shared with her aunt and returned carrying a shoebox tied with string. Her hands trembled as she untied the knot. "My mom was always very organized. She said that in a rich person's house you have to pay attention to everything because you never know when the information might be important." The first thing Edward saw was the notebook, a common school notebook with a blue cover completely filled with Rose's tiny, neat handwriting. She had divided each page into 3 columns: time, people present, and observations. Edward quickly flipped through the pages, feeling his stomach twist with each note. 7:30 a.m. Mr. Edward left for the airport. Mary stayed by the pool, crying on the phone. I couldn't hear who she was talking to. 2:20 p.m. Dr. Richard arrived unannounced. Mary rushed down from the library, looking like she had seen a ghost. They talked in the garden for 2 hours. 7:45 p.m. Mary had dinner alone, ate almost nothing, asked if I knew of any trustworthy lawyer who had no ties to Mr. Edward's companies. Edward lifted his eyes from the notebook, his heart racing. Rose noted this on March 15th, 2 days before Mary travelled. Carol leaned forward. "Rose called me that day, very nervous. She said she had discovered something terrible at the house where she worked, that she didn't know if she should tell or pretend she hadn't seen anything." "What did she see?" Edward asked, although part of him feared the answer. Sophia searched through a pile of papers and pulled out a crumpled sheet, clearly torn hastily from somewhere. "My mom found this in the trash of Mary's office. It was torn, but she pieced it together. It was a printout of an email, dated a week before Mary disappeared. The sender was an anonymous account, but the content made Edward's blood run cold. Mary, you don't understand the gravity of what you're doing. Some truths are too dangerous to come to light. Think of your safety. Think of Edward. Stop this investigation before it's too late for everyone. A concerned friend." "Investigation," Edward murmured. "Mary was investigating something, or someone." Carol got up and went to the kitchen, returning with a thermos of coffee and 3 cups. "Rose told me that Mary had hired a private investigator about 3 months before she disappeared. She said she wanted to investigate strange financial transactions in the company." Edward nearly dropped the cup. Financial transactions? But Richard handled all the financial aspects of the company. Mary didn't have access to the... "She did," Sophia interrupted, showing another note from the notebook. "Look here at what my mom wrote. Mary discovered how to access the company's system using Mr. Edward's password. She spends hours printing reports he doesn't even know exist." The room fell silent, only the ticking of the wall clock marking the passing seconds. Edward felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. Mary had used her own password to investigate the company. This meant she suspected he was involved in something illegal, or she was protecting you, Carol said, as if reading his thoughts. Rose always said that Mary loved you more than anything. If she was investigating secretly, it was because she wanted to protect you from something. Sophia pulled more papers from the box. My mom also kept this. It was a copy of a bank statement for an account Edward had never seen, in the name of a company called Whitestone Construction, LLC. The deposits were always round amounts, $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, and occurred with suspicious frequency. "I've never heard of this company," Edward said, studying the numbers. "And look at the dates of these deposits. Always a week after we close construction contracts for the new hotels." Carol served the coffee, her hands now steadier. Rose said that Mary discovered someone had been embezzling money from the company for years, small amounts at first, then larger sums, and that this person used your trust to do everything without you suspecting. Edward flipped through more pages of the notebook, finding increasingly detailed notes about Richard's visits. 3:30 p.m. Dr. Richard arrived nervous, asked several times if Mary was home. When he found out she was, he stayed in the car for 20 minutes before ringing the doorbell. 6:10 p.m. Dr. Richard and Mary argued in the office. I heard her shout, "You betrayed his trust for money." He replied something about it not being that simple. 8:45 p.m. Dr. Richard ran out of the house. Mary stayed in the library until 2 a.m., crying and making phone calls. Each line of the notebook revealed a more painful truth than the last. Edward, her best friend, wedding godfather, the man she trusted blindly, had been stealing from the company for years, and Mary had discovered it, tried to confront him, and... "Sophia," Edward said, his voice hoarse, "did your mother write anything about the day Mary disappeared?" Sophia turned to the last pages of the notebook. Rose's handwriting was clearly more nervous. Hurried. "Here, Mr. Edward, March 18th. Mary woke up at 5 a.m. She packed her bags, crying. She told me she was going to travel alone, that she needed to think. I asked if I should inform Mr. Edward. She said she had already left a message. But when she left, I didn't see any message." And underneath it says, "Dr. Richard arrived 30 minutes after Mary left. He asked where she had gone. When I said to the beach, he became very agitated. He ran out and forgot his phone on the living room sofa." Edward abruptly stood up, knocking the coffee cup to the floor. Carol rushed to clean it up, but he didn't even notice. His mind was processing a terrifying truth. Richard had arrived at the house 30 minutes after Mary left. He knew where she had gone. And that same afternoon, Mary's boat had mysteriously exploded, leaving no traces of her body. "The phone," Edward murmured. Rose said Richard forgot his phone. "My mother kept it," Sophia said softly. "It's here in the box. She thought it might be important." Sophia pulled out an old iPhone with a cracked screen. "My mother tried several times to figure out the password, but she couldn't. But she wrote down all the numbers that called him that day." Edward took the paper with the numbers. The last one, recorded at 3:47 p.m., exactly when the wreckage of the boat had been found, was from a number he knew well. It was the emergency number of the maritime security company that Richard had hired to organize the search for Mary. The same company that had officially declared there were no survivors. At that moment, Edward understood that his wife had not died in an accident. She had been silenced because she discovered the truth about his best friend, and Rose had disappeared because she knew too much. The next morning, Edward woke up in the Brooklyn apartment where he had set up Sophia and Carol. He had spent the night on the living room sofa, unable to return home, knowing that Richard had the keys and security codes to all his properties. The two-bedroom apartment overlooked the park and had 24-hour security, but more importantly, it was registered in the name of one of the subsidiaries that Richard didn't know about. Carol had prepared a hearty breakfast, warm bagels, cream cheese, ham and cantaloupe, but Edward could barely swallow. Sophia was sitting at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, flipping through her mother's notebook with the concentration of an experienced detective. "Mr. Edward," she said, pointing to a note they had missed the night before. Look at this. March 10th, a week before Mary disappeared. Dr. Richard brought a man in a grey suit. They talked in the garage for 2 hours. The man had a briefcase full of photos. Edward leaned in, his heart racing. Photos of what? My mother couldn't see. Clearly, but she wrote down here, I heard Dr. Richard say he had to be discreet, that Mr. Edward couldn't suspect anything yet. The man replied that his wife was asking too many questions of the right people. Carol stopped washing the dishes, turning with her hands still soapy. Rose called me that day, desperate. She said she was afraid to keep working in that house, that she felt something very bad was going to happen. Edward sat heavily at the table. Reality was becoming clearer and more frightening. Richard was not only stealing from the company, he was being investigated by Mary and had hired someone to watch her movements. Carol, did Rose tell you what kind of questions Mary was asking? Rose said Mary had sought out an independent accountant, a white-collar crime attorney, and even a private investigator. Carol dried her hands on a dish towel. She was building a case against someone. Rose was sure of it. Sophia abruptly stood up, running to her room. She returned carrying a green plastic folder that Edward hadn't seen the night before. I almost forgot. My mother hid this under my mattress. She said if anything happened to her, I should only give it to you. Inside the folder were documents that made Edward feel as if he had been punched in the stomach. Copies of construction contracts signed by him, but with amounts different from what he remembered approving. Financial reports showing payments to shell companies. And worst of all, proof of bank transfers from Edward's personal account to overseas accounts, transfers he had never authorized. Richard was using my digital signature, Edward murmured, studying the documents, and he had access to my bank accounts as the legal representative of the company. He looked at Sophia, and Carol, feeling a mix of anger and guilt. Mary discovered that he was framing me, making it look like I was responsible for the embezzlement. Carol sat down next to him. Rose always said that Mary was a very intelligent woman, that she understood numbers and business more than she let on. Sophia pointed to another document in the folder, a copy of an email that Mary had sent to a criminal attorney 3 days before her disappearance. Dr. August, as we discussed, I am attaching all the evidence I have gathered regarding the systematic embezzlement of funds from my husband's company. As you can see, someone... Edward clenched his fists, feeling the anger rise in his chest like lava surging up a volcano. She was trying to protect me. She found out that Richard was framing me and was trying to gather evidence to defend me, and that's why she had to fake her own death, Carol added, because Richard discovered what she was doing. At that moment, the intercom of the apartment buzzed. The three exchanged glances, fear palpable in the air. Edward approached the security monitor and saw a man in a grey suit at the entrance, exactly as Sophia had described. His blood ran cold. Carol, take Sophia and go to the back room. Lock the door and don't come out until I say so, Edward said, his voice controlled but firm. Mr. Edward, don't answer, Sophia pleaded. It could be dangerous. I need to know what this man wants, and I need to record everything. Edward grabbed his phone, activating the recording function. If anything goes wrong, you already know where all the evidence is. He answered the intercom. Yes? Mr. Edward Smith, my name is Mark Johnson. I'm a private investigator. I would like to speak with you about a very delicate matter regarding your deceased wife. Edward hesitated. It was either a coincidence, unlikely, or it was the same man who had been lurking around Carol's house. About what exactly? I prefer to discuss it in person, sir. I have information that may be of great interest to you, information about people close to you who may not be who they appear to be. It was an obvious trap, but Edward realized it might be his chance to find out how far the conspiracy against him went. Come up, Apartment 802. 2 minutes later, Edward opened the door to a man in his 40s with greying hair, an athletic build, and cold eyes that quickly scanned the apartment before settling on him. The man carried a black leather briefcase and wore a suit that cost more than most people's annual salary. "Mr. Smith, thank you for having me," Mark said, extending his hand. "I know this situation must be very disturbing for you." Edward did not shake the extended hand. "What situation?" Mark smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "The situation of discovering that your wife may be alive, and that certain people close to you may be involved in her disappearance." Edward forced himself to maintain a neutral expression. "I don't know what you're talking about. My wife died 2 years ago." "Died?" Mark opened the briefcase and pulled out several photographs, spreading them on the coffee table. "Then explain how we obtained these photos of her in a small town in Argentina, dated just 3 months ago." Edward looked at the photos and felt the world spin around him. It was Mary, thinner with shorter and lighter hair, but unmistakably his wife. In one of the photos, she was at a street fair. In another, entering a small hospital. In the third, sitting on a park bench playing with a small child. "How did you get these photos?" Edward asked, his voice coming out as a whisper. "I have my methods, Mr. Smith. The question is, are you interested in reuniting with your wife, or would you prefer that she remains dead?" Edward realized he was being blackmailed. "What do you want?" Mark leaned back on the sofa, completely at ease. "I want you to stop asking questions about certain financial transactions in your company. I want you to accept that your wife tragically died and to stop searching for answers that may be inconvenient for certain people." "And what if I don't stop?" Mark's smile grew colder. "Then your wife may suffer another accident, this time truly fatal. And little Sophia may discover that Argentine orphanages sometimes lose Brazilian children without proper documentation." Edward felt the blood boil in his veins. "You're threatening a child." "I'm offering protection for everyone involved, including you." Mark stood up, putting away the photos. "You have 48 hours to decide. Continue investigating and lose your wife forever, or accept that some secrets should remain buried and perhaps in the near future have a happy family reunion." After Mark left, Edward was left alone in the living room, trembling with rage and fear. Now he knew 3 things for sure. Mary was alive, Sophia was in danger, and Richard had resources and contacts far more powerful than he had imagined. But he also knew a 4th thing. He was not going to stop until he brought Mary home and saw Richard pay for everything he had done. The war had officially begun. Edward spent the entire night pacing the apartment, phone in hand, thinking about whom he could trust. The list was alarmingly small. Richard had been his right-hand man for 15 years, knowing all his contacts, lawyers, trusted employees. How many others in his circle were involved in the conspiracy? At 5 in the morning, he made a decision that would change everything. Dr. Andrew Parker was a criminal defense attorney known for his unwavering integrity and for taking only cases he believed in completely. His office was in a discreet loft on Main Street, far from the mirrored buildings of the big law firms. Edward had researched him during the night and discovered that Mary had indeed contacted him, but the lawyer had never returned her calls after the accident. When Edward arrived at the office at 7 in the morning, he found Dr. Andrew already working. He was a 60-year-old man with completely white hair, prescription glasses, and an air of someone who had seen it all in life. His office was simple yet elegant, with shelves full of legal codes and a dark wooden desk covered in files. "Mr. Smith," Dr. Andrew said, standing up to greet him, "I must confess I was very surprised by your call, especially after what happened with your wife." Edward sat in the brown leather armchair in front of the desk. "Doctor, I need to know exactly what my wife discussed with you before she disappeared." Dr. Andrew hesitated, nervously adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Smith, your wife came to me with very serious evidence of financial crimes involving your company. She was concerned that you were being unjustly incriminated." "And why didn't you contact me after she died?" "Because I received a very convincing call from your partner, Dr. Richard, explaining that your wife was experiencing severe psychological issues, that she had developed paranoia and was creating conspiracy theories about the company." Dr. Andrew paused, studying Edward's face. "He showed me medical reports indicating that she was undergoing psychiatric treatment." Edward felt his stomach churn. Medical reports? Mary never received psychiatric treatment in her life. Exactly what I began to suspect after she disappeared. Dr. Andrew opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "That's why I kept all the evidence she brought me. Despite Dr. Richard's call, my instinct told me something was very wrong." Edward opened the folder and found organized copies of all the documents he had seen, in the apartment, but with detailed analyses handwritten by Dr. Andrew. The attorney had done detective work, tracing every suspicious transaction, every shell company, every irregular bank movement. "Doctor, your wife had gathered enough evidence to incriminate Dr. Richard for conspiracy, money laundering, document forgery, and embezzlement," Dr. Andrew said, pointing to the analyses. "But more importantly, she had discovered that he was laying the groundwork to shift all the blame onto you. How? Look here." Dr. Andrew showed a series of printed emails. Dr. Richard had been creating a false electronic trail, making it seem like all the questionable financial decisions came from direct orders from you. He had been building a case against you for at least 2 years. Edward studied the emails, recognizing his digital signature on documents he had never seen. "He was planning to turn me in to the federal police." "Exactly. And your wife discovered all of this. That's why she came to me. She wanted to find a way to protect you without alerting Dr. Richard that she had been discovered." At that moment, Edward's phone rang. It was Sophia, her voice trembling and scared. "Mr. Edward, you need to come here. Now my aunt fainted, and there's a man at the front desk saying he's a doctor, but she didn't call any doctor." Edward stood up abruptly. "Don't let him come up. I'm on my way." He turned to Dr. Andrew. "Doctor, I need your help. My life and the life of a 12-year-old child are in danger." Dr. Andrew didn't hesitate. "Let's go." 20 minutes later, they arrived at the building in Brooklyn to find Sophia at the front desk, nervously talking to the doorman. "Mr. Edward, the man left when I said I was going to wait for you." "To arrive," she said, clutching his arm. "But he left this." It was an elegant business card. "Dr. Fernando Marks, Preventive Medicine and Home Care." On the back, a handwritten message. "Carol needs special care. I will return later." Dr. Andrew examined the card. "This is a disguised threat. They are indicating that they can make Carol sick at any moment." They went up to the apartment, where they found Carol sitting on the living room sofa, pale but conscious. "Sorry for the scare, everyone. I think it was just stress. I haven't slept well in days." Edward sat next to her. "Carol, we need to talk about something very serious. Dr. Andrew here is the attorney that Mary sought before she disappeared. He can help us, but first, I need you all to understand the gravity of the situation." He told them about Mark Johnson's visit the night before, about the photos of Mary in Argentina, about the threats. Carol paled even more, and Sophia clutched the rag doll she had carried since childhood. "Mr. Edward," Sophia said, her voice small but determined, "does this mean my mom is also in Argentina?" "It's very likely," Dr. Andrew replied, gently. "And that's why we need to act quickly, but very carefully." Edward looked out the window, watching the movement on the street below. "Dr. Andrew, I need to ask a difficult question. If I go to Argentina to look for Mary, am I putting her in more danger? It depends on how you do it. If you go alone without planning, it could be a trap. But if we are smart... Dr. Andrew paused, thoughtful. I have a contact in the federal police, a very reliable investigator named Officer Johnson. He can help us set up a legal operation. To protect your wife and gather evidence against Dr. Richard, Sophia stood up from the sofa. I will go with you to Argentina. Absolutely not, Edward said immediately. It's too dangerous. Mr. Edward, my mom is there, and I'm the only person here she would completely trust. Sophia's eyes sparkled with determination. Besides, if they are watching you, they may not be paying as much attention to a child. Carol took her niece's hand. The girl is right, Mr. Edward. Rose has always been very suspicious. If she sees unfamiliar adults looking for her, she might run away again. But if she sees Sophia... Dr. Andrew leaned forward. In fact, the presence of the girl could be our advantage. No one suspects that a 12-year-old child is a threat, and if Mary is really taking care of Rose's daughter, Sophia could be the key to reaching her. Edward looked at the three faces in front of him. An experienced attorney willing to risk his career for justice, a brave seamstress protecting the niece she loves, and a 12-year-old girl more determined than many adults he knew. All right, he finally said, but we do this the right way. Dr. Andrew, contact your contact in the federal police. Let's turn this personal search into an official operation. Carol stood up. Heading to the kitchen, Edward said, I'll make coffee for everyone. And Sophia, go pack a small bag. Just the essentials. As Sophia rushed to the bedroom, Dr. Andrew turned to Edward. Mr. Smith, I need you to understand one thing. If we really find your wife, and if she confirms everything we suspect about Dr. Richard, your life will never be the same. Edward nodded gravely. Doctor, my life changed forever the moment I discovered my wife might be alive. Now I just need to bring her home. From the bedroom, they heard Sophia softly humming while packing her bag, a lullaby that Rose used to sing to her. It was a sound of hope amidst the chaos, and Edward clung to it like a man clings to a life raft in the open sea. Argentina awaited them, and with it, all the answers. Ezeiza International Airport buzzed with the typical hustle and bustle of a Thursday morning. Edward discreetly observed his surroundings while they waited to board their flight to Buenos Aires, his eyes trained to identify any suspicious faces or strange movements. Dr. Andrew had managed to expedite the necessary documentation through his contacts at the federal police, and in less than 48 hours, they were ready for the trip that could change everything. Sophia sat next to Carol, flipping through a children's magazine, but Edward noticed she was tense. The girl had matured years in just a few days, carrying an emotional weight that no child should bear. Carol, for her part, had insisted on accompanying her niece, even knowing the risks. Rose entrusted me with this girl, she had said the night before. I won't abandon her. Now. Passengers of flight LA 3147 to Buenos Aires. Immediate boarding at gate 15, announced the metallic voice over the loudspeaker. Dr. Andrew approached the group, tucking his phone into his pocket. I just received confirmation from Officer Johnson. The Argentine Interpol has already been notified of our arrival. We will have local support if needed. During the 3-hour flight, Edward tried to mentally organize everything they knew so far. The photos that Mark Johnson had shown were from the town of San Rafael in the province of Mendoza, about 600 kilometers from Buenos Aires, a small town known for its vineyards and tranquility, the perfect place for someone wanting to disappear and start anew. Sophia had her head resting against the window, gazing at the clouds below. Mr. Smith, she said softly, what if my mum doesn't want to come back to Brazil? What if she built a new life and is afraid to leave Mary alone? It was a question Edward had asked himself hundreds of times throughout the night. Sophia, Your mum loves you more than anything in the world. If she hasn't come back yet, it's because she can't, not because she doesn't want to." Carol leaned over. "The seat. Rose always said she would do anything to protect you, Sophia. If she stayed in Argentina, it was to keep you safe." When they landed in Buenos Aires, the humid heat of the Argentine summer greeted them like a warm gust. Ezeiza Airport was busy, but Edward immediately noticed two men in suits who seemed to be watching the arriving passengers. He discreetly touched Dr. Andrew's arm and pointed in their direction with his eyes. "They were expected," Dr. Andrew murmured. "Let's split up. Carol and I will go through the main exit. You two take the side. Exit. We'll meet at the hotel in 2 hours." Edward took Sophia's hand and casually walked toward the side exit, stopping at a few shops to disguise their movements. The two men in suits did not follow them, focused on Dr. Andrew and Carol. Once outside, Edward called a taxi and gave the address of the hotel they had agreed upon, a simple establishment in downtown Buenos Aires, far from the luxury hotels where Edward would typically stay. "Dad!" Sophia suddenly said, making Edward jump. "Sorry, Mr. Smith. I thought it would be better to pretend we're father and daughter. That way no one suspects." Edward smiled, feeling an unexpected tenderness for the girl's bravery. "Good idea, Sophia. You're very clever." The San Martin Hotel was an old 3-story building with a blue-tiled facade and a small but cozy lobby. The receptionist, an Argentine gentleman with a graying moustache, greeted them in Portuguese with a strong porteño accent. "Welcome to Buenos Aires. First time in Argentina?" "No, I've been here a few times for work," Edward lied. "Now I brought my daughter to see the sights." 2 hours later, Dr. Andrew and Carol arrived at the hotel, visibly tired. "We were followed from the airport to here," Dr. Andrew reported, as they ascended to the room that would serve as their operations base. "But we managed to lose them at a subway station." Carol sat on the bed, taking off her sore shoes. "I never thought I would leave Brazil one day, and now I'm here, looking for my sister in an adventure that feels like a movie." Sophia unfolded the map of Argentina she had bought at the airport. "San Rafael is here. If we take a bus tomorrow morning, we'll get there by late afternoon." Dr. Andrew shook his head. "We can't all go together. It's too risky. Edward, you and Sophia will take a rental car. Carol and I will go by bus at different times. If something goes wrong with one group, the other can still continue the search." Edward studied the map. "How are we going to find Mary in a town we don't know? It's like looking for a needle in a haystack." Sophia smiled, pointing to one of the photos that Mark had shown. "Mr. Smith, look here in this photo. Mary is coming out of a building that has a sign in front. It says San Rafael Municipal Hospital. If she works or receives treatment there, that's our starting point." Dr. Andrew nodded, impressed. "The girl is right. And look at this other photo. Mary is at a street fair. Small towns have fairs on specific days of the week. If we find out which day, we can—" That night, while the others slept, Edward stood on the hotel balcony, looking at the lights of Buenos Aires. The city was alive with nightlife. Couples walking along the wide sidewalks, bustling restaurants, music spilling out from bars. He was so close to reuniting with Mary that he could almost smell her jasmine perfume in the air. His phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Smith, we know you are in Buenos Aires. Last chance to back out before it's too late. Think of the safety of the child with you." Edward glanced at the room where Sophia was sleeping peacefully next to Carol. For a moment, he considered giving up, returning to Brazil, and accepting that some truths might be too dangerous to uncover. But then he remembered Mary's face in the photos, the hope in Sophia's eyes, and Rose's courage in protecting those she loved even at great risk. He typed a response, "Come and get us," and hung up the phone. The next morning, Edward woke Sophia at 6 o'clock. "Change of plans, Princess. We're leaving earlier than planned." While Carol was still asleep, they quietly went downstairs and took a taxi to the car rental agency. Edward had chosen a plain, discreet white Volkswagen Golf. By 7 in the morning, they were already on the road to San Rafael, the rising sun painting the sky orange over the Argentine plains. "Mr. Edward," said Sophia, looking out. "The window at the passing landscapes. There's something I haven't told you about my mom." Edward looked in the rearview mirror. "What is it?" "She always said that if she ever had to run away with me, we would go to Argentina, because here she had a childhood friend who could help us." Sophia paused. "I think this friend might be the person helping Mary too." Edward felt a pang of hope. "Do you remember this friend's name?" "Dolores. Dolores Johnson. My mom said they were like sisters when they were kids, before Dolores's family moved to Argentina." As he drove through the Argentine roads, Edward realized that each kilometer brought him closer not only to Mary, but also to the answers he had been seeking for 2 years. And beside him, a brave 12-year-old girl was guiding him toward the most significant reunion of his life. San Rafael awaited them 400 kilometers away, along with all the truths that had been hidden for so long. The city of San Rafael unfolded before them in the late afternoon, a small urban gem surrounded by vineyards that stretched into the golden horizon. The streets were wide and tree-lined, with low Spanish, colonial-style houses and a tranquility that contrasted sharply with the hustle and bustle of New York. Edward parked the Volkswagen Golf in front of Los Andes Hotel, a 2-story family inn with a light yellow facade and balconies adorned with wrought iron. Sophia had slept through most of the journey, but now she was alert, observing every detail of the city through the window. "It's so different from Brazil," she murmured, pointing to a central square where elderly people played dominoes under the shadows of flowering jacaranda trees. "It seems calmer." "It's exactly the kind of place someone would come to start over," Edward replied, feeling his heart race. Somewhere in that quiet city, Mary was living, breathing, perhaps even smiling again. The hotel owner, an Argentine gentleman with white hair and a neatly trimmed mustache, greeted them with the typical hospitality of the countryside. "Welcome, I'm Mr. Carlos Johnson. Are you here to visit our vineyards?" Edward felt Sophia squeeze his arm tightly. "The surname Johnson. Actually, we're looking for an old family friend, Dolores Johnson. Do you happen to know her?" Carlos's face lit up. "Dolores, of course. She's my daughter. She works at the municipal hospital. She's the head nurse in pediatrics, a wonderful woman always helping everyone." He paused, studying Edward and Sophia's faces with growing curiosity. "You are from Brazil, right? She has talked a lot about some Brazilian friends who came here a while ago." Edward and Sophia exchanged a meaningful glance. They had found the connection they were looking for, and it was even closer than they had imagined. "Mr. Carlos," Sophia said, her voice trembling with emotion, "my mom's name is Rose Johnson. She was your daughter's best friend when they were kids in Brazil. She disappeared 1.5 years ago, and we think she might have come looking for Dolores." Carlos fell silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between Edward and Sophia. Finally, he sighed deeply. "I think it's best if you talk to my daughter. But," he hesitated, "there are things I can't say here. Let's go to my house tonight after she gets back from the hospital." The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. Edward tried to call Dr. Andrew, but the call wouldn't go through. They walked around the city, visiting the central square, having ice cream at a local ice cream shop, trying to blend in as ordinary tourists. But Edward noticed curious glances from the locals. In a small town, foreigners drew attention. At 7 o'clock, Carlos took them to his home, a single-story stone building surrounded by a lush garden. Dolores was in the kitchen preparing pastries, a woman in her 40s with dark hair tied back in a ponytail and the same warm smile as her father. When she saw Sophia, she dropped the dough from her hands. "Rose," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh my God, you look just like your mother when she was a girl." Sophia ran to her, throwing herself into her arms as if she had known Dolores her whole life. "Aunt Dolores, you know my mum. Is she here? Is she okay?" Dolores hugged Sophia tightly, openly crying. "Yes, dear. Yes, she is. And she misses you so much." She looked up at Edward. "And you must be Edward. Mary talks about you every day." The world stopped for Edward. She is here. Is Mary really here?" "She is. But I can't take you to where they are right now. It's very dangerous. There are men looking for them, men who arrived in the city yesterday asking questions." Dolores wiped her tears with her apron. "Mary and Rose are hiding in a small house in the countryside, 20 kilometers from here. They only go out when absolutely necessary." Mr. Carlos closed the curtains and turned on only the kitchen lights. "Dolores, tell them how the women got here." Dolores sat at the table, pulling Sophia into her lap as if she were her own daughter. "Rose arrived first, a year and a half ago, desperate and very scared. She said she had helped a boss escape from Brazil, but that dangerous men were after her. She hid in my house for weeks." "And Mary?" asked Edward, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Mary arrived 3 months later, very sick, very thin, traumatized. Rose had managed to get her out of Brazil, but she had lost her memory of some things. The shock, you know." Dolores stroked Sophia's hair. "She remembered you, Edward, remembered the love she felt, but she couldn't quite remember why she had fled. Rose had to tell her everything again, several times." Edward clenched his fists, imagining Mary alone, confused, traumatized, while he cried over an empty grave. What kind of illness does she have? The doctors here said it was severe post-traumatic stress. She was having episodes of recent memory loss, panic attacks, nightmares. Dolores paused. "But she has improved a lot. She works with me at the hospital now, taking care of underprivileged children. She found purpose in life again." Sophia shifted in Dolores's lap. "And my mom, how is she?" "Rose is a warrior woman, sweetheart. She took care of Mary like a daughter, helped her recover, never lost hope that one day you would all be together again." Dolores smiled. "She also raised a boy." Edward felt his heart stop. "A boy. Yes, Mary was pregnant when she got here, but she didn't know. She gave birth 6 months later. A beautiful boy with his father's green eyes." Dolores looked directly at Edward. "She named him Michael Edward." Edward had to lean against the wall to avoid falling. He had a son. A 1.5-year-old son he had never met, who took his first steps without him, said his first words far from home. Mr. Carlos approached, placing a protective hand on Edward's shoulder. "Friend, I know this is a lot of information at once, but you need to know that Mary never doubted you would come looking for her. Rose always said that Sophia would find a way to reach them." Dolores stood up, still carrying Sophia. "I'll take you to them tomorrow morning before the hospital opens, but tonight you stay here, where it's safe. Those men looking for them, they're not people to mess with." "What men?" Edward asked, although he already suspected the answer. "One of them introduced himself as a private investigator. He said you hired him to find your wife, but Mary was terrified when she found out. She said she knew that man, that he worked for the person who wanted to hurt her." Edward nodded gravely. Mark Johnson had arrived in Argentina before them. The net was closing in. "Dolores," he said, "my wife and Rose are in danger. Very powerful men want to silence them permanently. I need to get them out of here as quickly as possible." "I know," Dolores replied, holding Sophia more tightly. That's why I arranged everything for you to escape together tomorrow. Rose has already prepared fake documents for her and for Mary, and Mr. Carlos knows safe routes to get to Chile. Sophia lifted her head, looking at Edward. Mr. Edward, when I see my mum tomorrow, it will be like all the pieces of my life come together again. Edward smiled, feeling tears burning his eyes. Sophia, when I see Mary and meet my son, it will be like being born again. That night, while Sophia slept peacefully in the guest room, Edward stood on Mr. Carlos's porch looking at the Argentine stars. Tomorrow, finally, the whole truth would come to light. Tomorrow, he would reunite not only with his wife, but also discover who he truly was as a father. And tomorrow, he would also find out if he could protect his family from the threat that had been pursuing them for so long. The sun had not yet risen when Dolores woke Edward and Sophia. It was 5 a.m. on a Friday that promised to be the most important day of their lives. Mr. Carlos had prepared coffee with milk and toast, but Edward could barely swallow a few sips, his stomach twisted with nerves, not allowing him to eat properly. Sophia, on the other hand, ate with appetite, as if sensing she would need energy to face what lay ahead. "Sweethearts," Dolores said, checking for the 3rd time that the curtains were tightly closed, "we'll go out the back door. Mr. Carlos will drive, I'll go in front, and you two will stay low in the back seat. The small house is on a dirt road in the middle of the vineyards, well hidden." Mr. Carlos's red compact car was parked in the yard, hidden behind a wooden fence covered in vines. Edward helped Sophia get in first, then settled next to her, both crouched as instructed. The smell of ripe grapes wafted through the slightly open windows as the car bounced along the uneven roads, cutting through the fields. "Uncle Carlos," Sophia said, her small voice breaking the morning silence. "Will my mom recognize my voice even after all this time?" "Of course she will, sweetheart," Mr. Carlos replied, smiling through the rearview mirror. "Mothers never forget their children's voices. It's like music recorded in their hearts." After 40 minutes of travel, the car stopped on a small dirt road surrounded by grapevines heavy with fruit. Edward raised his head and saw a simple white house with a red shingle roof and a small porch where clothes were drying on the line. Smoke was rising from the chimney, indicating that someone was home. Dolores was awake, preparing breakfast. "This is it," she sighed. "Mary and Rose have been living here for 6 months. The owner of the property is a friend of my father's. He let them stay in exchange for taking care of the house and helping with the harvest." Edward got out of the car, his legs trembling. After 2 years of mourning, 2 weeks of intense investigation, and a journey of 1,000 miles, he was just a few feet away from reuniting with the woman he loved. Sophia took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Together," she said, smiling nervously. They walked slowly along the stone path leading to the front door. Edward could hear female voices chatting in the kitchen, low laughter, the sound of dishes being handled. He could smell homemade bread in the air, mixed with the aroma of ripe grapes surrounding the property. Dolores knocked on the door 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more, clearly a prearranged code. "Dolores!" came a voice from inside the house. Edward recognized it immediately. It was Rose, the housekeeper who had taken care of his home for 5 years. "It's me, Rose, and I brought a very special surprise." The door opened slowly, and Rose appeared, thinner than Edward remembered, with graying hair, but with the same warm smile. Her eyes first went to Dolores, then to Edward, and finally landed on Sophia. The world stopped. "My girl," Rose whispered, dropping to her knees on the doorstep. "My beautiful Sophia." Sophia released Edward's hand and ran into her mother's arms, both crying and laughing at the same time. Mom, I knew I would find you. I never gave up." Edward watched the reunion, with tears in his eyes, but part of his mind was focused on the sounds coming from inside the house. Quick footsteps, a female voice asking something in Spanish, and then the cry of a child, a baby, waking up with the excitement. "Rose," said a voice that made Edward's heart stop completely. "Who is it?" Mary appeared at the door, carrying a small child with dark hair and green eyes. She looked thinner, with shorter and lighter hair than in the photos, but she was unmistakably his wife. She wore a simple blue cotton dress and was barefoot, as she often was at home on lazy Sundays. When her eyes met Edward's, she let out a muffled gasp. "Edward, is it really you?" Edward couldn't speak. He just nodded, trying to memorize every detail of her face. The small wrinkles around her eyes that hadn't been there before, the small scar on her forehead that he didn't know, the way she held the baby protectively against her chest. Mary slowly descended the 2 steps of the porch, as if Edward were a mirage that could disappear at any moment. "I searched for you for so long," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I thought I would never see you again." "I never stopped looking for you," Edward managed to say, his voice hoarse. "I never stopped loving you." They moved closer slowly, like 2 magnets being drawn together after years of forced separation. When they finally touched, Mary's free hands finding Edward's face, they both broke down in tears. "I'm sorry," Mary sobbed. "I'm sorry for making you believe I was dead. I'm sorry for not finding a way to let you know I was okay." Edward pulled her into his arms, feeling the jasmine perfume she still wore, mixed with the scent of baby and coconut soap. "Don't apologize. You were protecting yourself. You were protecting our son." Mary pulled back slightly, looking surprised. "Do you know that he is your son?" Edward looked at the child Mary was carrying, a boy of about 1.5 years, with dark curls and the green eyes of the Johnson family. The boy watched him with curiosity, unafraid, as if he recognized something familiar. "Michael Edward," Edward said, reaching out to gently touch his son's little face. "Dolores told us." Michael smiled, a toothless and pure smile that broke and repaired Edward's heart simultaneously. The boy reached out his chubby arms toward his father, babbling something unintelligible but affectionate. "Dad," Michael said clearly, making Mary cry even harder. He knows who I am?" "I show him your picture every day," Mary explained, passing the boy into Edward's arms for the first time. "I tell him that Dad is far away, but that one day he will come to get us." Edward held his son, feeling the small, warm weight against his chest. Michael immediately grabbed his tie, pulling with the typical strength of a child, and Edward laughed through his tears. "He's perfect," Edward murmured. "He's absolutely perfect." On the other side of the porch, Sophia and Rose were still hugging, talking quickly in English, Rose stroking her daughter's hair as if she needed to confirm she was real. "Sophia has grown so much," Rose said, looking at Edward with infinite gratitude. "Mr. Edward, how can I thank you for taking care of my girl?" "Sophia saved me," Edward replied, still holding Michael. "She was the key to finding you. She was the bravest person I've ever met." Dolores, who had been watching the whole scene in respectful silence, finally stepped forward. "Sorry to interrupt this beautiful moment, but we need to talk about the situation. Those men are getting closer." Mr. Carlos appeared around the bend of the road, running toward the house. "Dolores, I just saw 2 black cars on the main road heading this way. We have maybe 10 minutes before they get here." The moment of pure happiness instantly turned into organized panic. Rose took Sophia by the hand. Mary checked to make sure she had everything she needed in Michael's bag, and Edward returned the boy to his mother's arms. "What do we do now?" Edward asked. Dolores pointed to a path that disappeared among the grapevines. "There's an abandoned hunting cabin on the other side of the mountain. You'll go on foot along this path. We're driving along the main road to distract them. No, Edward said immediately. I'm not going to let you put yourselves in danger because of us. Mr. Carlos Johnson was already pushing everyone toward the trail. Edward, my friend, our family helped your family. That's how things work here. Now go and take care of each other. As they ran down the narrow path between the vineyards, Edward looked back one last time. Mr. Carlos Johnson and Dolores were getting into the car, likely to face dangerous men on behalf of people they barely knew. But Edward didn't have time to feel guilty. He had a family to protect now. A real, complete family that was finally reunited, and he wasn't going to lose them again. The trail wound steeply up the mountain, passing through ancient vineyards and eucalyptus groves that exuded a refreshing aroma in the growing heat of the Argentine morning. Edward carried Michael in his arms, feeling the muscles in his legs burn. With effort, while Mary held his free hand and Rose walked just behind with Sophia. The baby, surprisingly, seemed to be enjoying the adventure, laughing and pointing at the birds crossing the blue sky. "How much further?" Sophia asked, her breath panting but determined. The girl had once again proven her extraordinary resilience, keeping pace without complaints, despite the challenging terrain. "About 2 miles, Mary replied, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "The cabin is in a clearing at the top. From there, we can see the entire road coming from the city." Edward paused for a moment to adjust Michael in his arms and check if he could hear any suspicious sounds coming from below. The silence was unsettling. There wasn't even the sound of distant engines. Either Mr. Carlos Johnson and Dolores had managed to shake off their pursuers, or— "Don't think about it," Mary said softly, touching his arm. "Carlos knows every inch of these mountains. If anyone can outsmart those men, it's him." Rose approached, pulling a water bottle from the backpack she was carrying. "Sophia, drink. And you too, Mr. Edward. There's no point in arriving dehydrated at the cabin." While they rested briefly in the shade of a century-old tree, Edward took the opportunity to really observe his wife and son for the first time since their reunion. Mary looked visibly stronger than in the photos. Her face had color, and her arms showed muscles developed from hard work. Michael was playing with the leaves falling from the branches, babbling a mix of English and Spanish that was both adorable and touching. "Mary," Edward said softly, "I need you to tell me what really happened that day. The day you disappeared." Mary looked at Sophia and Rose, who were examining animal tracks in the dirt, before responding. "Richard called me the morning I was supposed to travel. He said he needed to talk to me urgently, that he had discovered something about you that could destroy our family." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "He said you were involved in money laundering, that the federal police were going to arrest you in a matter of days." Edward felt anger rising in his chest. "And you believed him?" "For a few minutes, yes. Richard was your best friend. Why would he lie about something like that?" Mary took his hand. "But then I remembered all the evidence I had gathered against him. I realized it was a trap." "What did you do?" "I called Rose, told her everything. She said she was also suspicious of Richard, that she had seen strange things at the house. We decided I should pretend to believe him, set up a meeting, but actually escape." Rose chimed in, listening to the conversation. "I told Mary that I knew a safe place in Argentina, that my childhood friend could help us. But first, we had to make Richard and everyone believe she was really dead." Sophia looked at them, confused. "But how did you do that? How did you make the boat explode?" Mary smiled sadly. "We didn't. Rose had a cousin who worked at the port in Santos. He knew smugglers who made routes to Argentina. We paid them to take the boat out to sea and make it look like it exploded." "And the body?" Edward asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "There was never a body," Rose said. "Richard knew that, but he was the one who convinced the authorities to stop searching. He said you were too distraught, that it would be better for everyone to accept that Mary had died. Edward clenched his fists. Richard had orchestrated everything, created the situation that forced Mary to flee, and then manipulated the search to ensure she was never found. Did he want you dead for real, or just out of the way? At first, I think he just wanted to scare me into stopping the investigation, but when he realized I had too much evidence— Mary shuddered. Rose saved me. If she hadn't helped me escape that day, I wouldn't be here talking to you. A distant sound of a helicopter made everyone look. Up at the sky, Edward felt his stomach tighten. Private helicopters weren't common in that rural area. "We need to keep climbing," Rose said, putting away the water bottle. "We can see the cabin from here." At the top of the mountain, the abandoned hunting cabin was a rustic structure made of wood and stone, partially covered by vines. It had two small windows that offered a panoramic view of the valley, and a door that creaked in protest when Edward pushed it open. Inside, they found basic furniture covered in dusty sheets, a stone fireplace, and a smell of old wood and dampness. But more importantly, there were supplies, canned food, drinking water, clean blankets. Someone had prepared this place as a hideout. "Carlos," Mary explained, seeing Edward's curious expression. "He set up several safe spots in the mountains. You never know when someone might need to disappear for a while." Sophia went to the window, looking down at the road below. "I can see two black cars parked in front of the small house where you lived. And— wait." She pointed to another spot in the distance. "Okay, there's another car on the main road. They are surrounding the area." Edward joined her at the window. Using an old binoculars he found on a shelf, he managed to distinguish human figures moving around the cars, at least 6 men, all apparently armed. "They didn't come just to talk," he murmured. Rose was organizing the food cans when Edward's phone rang. He hesitated before answering. The number was unknown. "Mr. Smith," said the familiar voice of Mark Johnson, "I know you're up on the mountain, and I know your wife and the child are with you." Edward put the phone on speaker. "What do you want?" "I want you to come down now. My men found Mr. Carlos and Dolores. They are fine for now, but if you don't show up in an hour, I can't guarantee they will stay that way." Mary covered her mouth with her hands, and Sophia clung to Rose's arm. Michael, sensing the tension in the air, began to whimper. "You're a coward," Edward said, his voice heavy with anger, "threatening innocent people." "Mr. Smith, I'm not the villain in this story. I'm just a man doing my job. Dr. Richard Miller paid very well to resolve this situation, definitively. But I still prefer to do it without unnecessary violence. And if we come down, what happens? Your wife and the housekeeper will have a very tragic accident on the way back to Miami. You and the children will return to Brazil and forget that any of this happened." Edward looked at his gathered family. Mary holding Michael against her chest, Rose protectively hugging Sophia, all looking at him for a solution that didn't exist. "1 hour," Mark repeated, "or Carlos and Dolores will pay for the mistake of helping you." The call ended, leaving the cabin in absolute silence, broken only by the wind swaying the trees outside. Edward had 1 hour to find a way to save the family he had just reunited with, without condemning to death the brave people who had helped them. And for now, he had no idea how to do that. Edward walked to the cabin window, watching the movement of the black cars below as his mind worked frantically in search of a solution. 55 minutes. That was all the time they had to save not only their own lives, but also those of Carlos and Dolores, who had risked everything to help strangers in need. "Edward," Mary said softly, approaching with Michael asleep in her arms, "there's something I haven't told you yet. Something that could change all of this." Edward turned, seeing in his wife's eyes a determination that hadn't been there moments before. "What is it?" Mary handed Michael to Rose and went to an old backpack in the corner of the cabin. From inside, she pulled out a sealed envelope and a small USB drive. "Before fleeing Brazil, I managed to hack the company's system one last time. Not only did I collect evidence against Richard, I accessed his personal emails, conversations with other criminals, even phone recordings he made to blackmail politicians." Sophia approached, her eyes shining with hope. "Does that mean we can prove he's guilty?" "More than that," Rose said, smiling for the first time since they arrived at the cabin. Mary discovered that Richard had been under investigation by the FBI for months. They just needed enough evidence to arrest him. Edward took the USB drive, feeling its small but significant weight. "Mary, are you saying we have information that could take down Richard for good?" "Not just Richard. His entire criminal network, corrupt politicians, businessmen, involved in money laundering, even judges who accepted bribes to dismiss cases." Mary opened the envelope, showing meticulously organized copies of documents. "Edward, your wife may not understand much about technology, but she spent months learning how to be a spy." Edward smiled, feeling a mix of pride and love that almost took his breath away. "You are amazing. But how does this help us now? Mark and his men are down there, and we have no way out of here." Sophia ran to the window, pointing at something the others hadn't noticed. "Mr. Edward, look there. More cars are. And coming. But these are different. They are police cars." Edward grabbed the binoculars and confirmed 3 Miami Police Department vehicles were approaching from both sides of the road, discreetly surrounding Mark's cars. "How did they know?" Edward's phone rang again, but this time it was Dr. Andrew Parker. "Edward, thank God I managed to reach you. Officer Johnson alerted the FBI as soon as we lost contact. They located your position through the GPS on your phone and are heading up now. Dr. Andrew, Mary has evidence that could take down Richard and his entire organization. Even better, the officer is on his way with a specialized team. But Edward, don't do anything risky. Just wait for the rescue to arrive." Down in the valley, the situation was changing rapidly. Mark's men had noticed the approach of the police and began to move nervously. Edward saw Mark speaking aggressively on the phone, gesturing to his subordinates. "They're getting desperate," Edward murmured. The phone rang once more. It was Mark, his voice now clearly agitated. "Mr. Smith, it seems you called in the cavalry. What a shame. Now I'll have to do this the hard way. Mark, you are surrounded. Surrender. And maybe you can still negotiate. I don't think you understand the situation, Mr. Smith. Carlos and Dolores are in one of my cars. If the Miami police try anything, they die first." Edward felt his blood run cold, but before he could respond, he heard a familiar voice in the background of the call. "Edward, don't listen to them. Carlos and I are fine, but there's something you need to know about Richard." It was Dolores's voice, and she was shouting for him to hear. "Richard isn't in the Brazil! It's here in the United States, in a hideout, near New York." The call was abruptly cut off, but the information had already arrived. Richard was not commanding the operation from afar. He was personally supervising the capture of Mary and Edward. "This changes everything," said Rose, picking up Michael and cradling him. "If Richard is here, it means this is his last play. If he can't silence you now, he'll be arrested by the FBI." Mary approached Edward, taking his hands. "My love, it's time to end this. We can't spend the rest of our lives running, and we can't let Richard hurt more innocent people." Edward nodded, feeling a strange calm wash over him. "You're right. Let's go down and face this together, as a family." They slowly descended the trail, Edward carrying an improvised white flag made from a sheet from the cabin. When they reached the clearing where the cars were parked, They found a tense scene. FBI agents pointing guns at Mark's men, who in turn were holding Mr. Carlos Johnson and Dolores as human shields. "Mr. Smith," shouted the commander of the police operation, "stay back. We are negotiating the release of the hostages." But Edward had a different plan. He stepped forward, holding the flash drive high for everyone to see. "Mark, I have all the evidence against Richard Miller and his entire criminal organization right here. Everything you always wanted to destroy. Trade Mr. Carlos and Dolores for this information." Mark hesitated, clearly trying to assess if it was a trap. "How do I know it's not an empty flash drive?" Edward opened the envelope that Mary had given him and began to read aloud. Phone conversation between Richard Miller and Senator Paul Adams, dated January 15th of last year. "Paul, we need to expedite the approval of the bill that allows construction in preservation areas. I've already deposited $200,000 into the usual account." Mark's expression changed. This was real information and he knew it. "Continue." Email from Richard to Judge Maurice Collins. "Maurice, the Petrobras case needs to be filed by Friday. The payment will be made in the usual manner." Edward looked directly at Mark. "I have hundreds of documents like this, enough to imprison half the federal government." It was then that a black armored car arrived from the other side of the road, stopping with tires screeching. Out of the back door stepped Richard Miller himself, thinner with grey hair, visibly aged by stress, but still carrying the arrogance that Edward knew all too well. "Edward," said Richard, calmly walking toward the group as if arriving for a business lunch. "My old friend, it's good to finally meet in person to resolve this unpleasant situation." Edward felt all the anger that had built up over the past 2 years boil in his chest. "Richard, the man I considered a brother, the man who destroyed my family." "I didn't destroy your family, Edward. I just reorganized the circumstances." Richard smiled, the same fake smile he used in business meetings. "Your wife was getting involved where she shouldn't have. You understand how business is. Sometimes certain people become inconvenient." Mary stepped forward, looking directly at Richard for the first time in 2 years. "Richard, you stole from Edward, tried to frame him, forced our family apart. And for what? For money. For power," Richard corrected. "Edward has always been too idealistic, too honest for the real world of business. I just took advantage of the opportunities he was too naive to see." Sophia, who had been silent until then, slipped her hand from Rose's and walked directly to Richard. "My mom always said you were a bad person, that you smiled in front but plotted behind backs." Richard looked at the girl with disdain. "And you must be the little daughter of the meddling housekeeper. Too bad your mother didn't teach you to be quiet." That was the last straw for Edward. He stepped forward, but before he could do anything, he heard sirens in the distance. Many sirens. The commander of the police operation spoke quickly into the radio and then shouted, "FBI reinforcements are arriving! Everyone on the ground! Now!" What happened next was like an action movie. SWAT team members emerged from the trees, helicopters appeared in the sky, and armored cars completely surrounded the area. In less than 5 minutes, Mark and all his men were handcuffed. Mr. Carlos and Dolores were free and hugging their families, and Richard was being read his rights in 3 languages. "Edward Smith?" asked an FBI agent approaching. "I'm Agent Rodriguez. Dr. Andrew passed us the preliminary evidence your wife collected. With the additional material you brought today, we can ensure that Richard Miller and his entire organization will spend a time in prison." Edward handed over the flash drive and documents, feeling an immense weight lift from his shoulders. "Agent Rodriguez, can my family finally go home?" "More than that, Mr. Smith. You will return as heroes. The evidence your wife gathered will help dismantle one of the largest corruption networks in history, As Richard was placed in the police car, he shouted one last time, "Edward, you don't know what you've done. There were other people involved, people more powerful than me." Edward approached the car, looking directly into the eyes of the man he had considered a brother. "Richard, those powerful people will also pay for their crimes. Mary and I will make sure of that." As the police cars drove away, taking Richard and his henchmen to prison, Edward turned to his gathered family. Mary was holding Michael, who had slept through all the commotion. Rose had her arm around Sophia, who was smiling for the first time in days. Mr. Carlos and Dolores approached, both with tears in their eyes. "Friends," said Mr. Carlos, "you will always have a family here in the United States. Always." Edward hugged the couple who had risked everything to help them. "Mr. Carlos, Dolores, how can we thank you for everything you've done?" "By living happily," replied Dolores, smiling through her tears. Tears. Raising this beautiful boy, taking care of these brave women, and always remembering that true love is stronger than any evil. 6 months later, back in the United States, Edward was in his renovated office, now completely free from any influence of Richard, when Sophia rushed in, carrying a letter. She had moved in with Rose to a house near the mansion in Beverly Hills and was studying at an excellent private school, courtesy of Edward. "Mr. Edward, a letter has arrived from Dolores Johnson." Edward smiled, opening the letter that contained photos from this year's harvest in the vineyards of Napa Valley. In one of the photos, Mr. Carlos Johnson was holding a sign, "Santana Johnson Family Vineyard," the vineyard that Edward had purchased for the family that saved them. Mary entered the office carrying Michael, now 2 years old and speaking an adorable mix of English and Spanish. She had completely recovered from her traumas and was now running a foundation that helped families separated by crimes reunite. "My love," she said, snuggling up next to Edward. "Michael said his first complete sentence today." "What was it?" Mary smiled, kissing her son's cheek. "He said, 'Dad, Mum, family together forever.'" Edward embraced his wife and son, looking out the window at Rose and Sophia playing in the garden with the dog they had adopted. Their family had been broken by greed and evil, scattered across 2 countries, separated by lies and fear. But love had proven to be stronger than all of that. And now, finally, they were home. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment, "I watched until here," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's going to be very exciting.